Okay, so the first thing we're going to do inside the car is measure the center line. A lot of vehicles have markings in the center line. You're going to have a brace in the roof right here, or you're going to get like a little hole in the frame. So what we're going to do is just kind of figure where the center line is, lay a piece of tape there, and we're actually going to measure it. Now, you can do it two ways. You can measure literally the center line from like this seam right here to this seam right here. We're making the assumption that the chassis is square. I did have this chassis at the frame shop, so I do know for a fact that it is square. So we're going to go ahead and measure the distance between these 2 points on the seams. And we're getting 30.5 inches. So we're going to take half of that. That's going to be 15.25 inch. We'll measure 15.25 inch from this seam. Go ahead and mark it.
Whoa.
Oh. And then we're just going to reconfirm it from the other seam to make sure that we're actually centered. 15.25. Fatten that line up a little bit so we can actually see it. Now we have our center line measured. Everything that I do when I bend things is from the center out. That's why it's important to get a good center line. Okay, now that we have the center line marked, we're going to get the actual X and Y plane that we're going to make this hoop in. So we're going to need to get the total width, and we're going to measure that on the bottom here.
The bottom.
Across the trans tunnel. And we are at 56.5 inches wide.
You like doing it in inches, not metric?
Yeah, we're doing it in inches.
Okay.
We're not back in Russia.
Sorry, I thought it's communism already.
Okay, next we're going to go ahead and get the Y axis, which is the height. Now, Z chassis are a little bit different because they have this weird bulkhead right here. So I don't want the cage to actually come up to the roof, because then I won't be able to get a straight shot to the rear shock tower. So we're going to actually put the top of the cage right up here. That way we can actually get the hoop or the backstays all the way back to the shock tower in a nice straight line. How we're going to do that is we're going to measure from our floor all the way up. Up top here. And about 40 inches. 40 inches for our height. Okay, now that we have our actual X and Y plane that we're going to be working within, we're going to go ahead and lay the first measurement for the first bend. Now what we do is we're going to use our little cheater bar that I showed you guys how to make before.
And how many degrees is that? 60?
This one is 60. I've made them at 90 before. I decided to make a 60-degree one to show you guys how to make them, just because I never bend things at 90 degrees. So this gives a little bit more realistic lay in the car.
Okay.
So what we're going to do is we're just going to lay a piece of masking tape roughly about where we think that start of the first bend is going to go. It's going to be about right there. We'll take our cheater bar and we'll lay it tight to the chassis. Tight against the chassis, right there. And we see where our little notch is cut. That's exactly our 0 datum point. And we're going to go ahead and mark it.
So it's the start of the bend?
That's the start of our first bend.
Okay.
Alright, so now that we have the first bend marked out, we're going to go ahead and measure the distance between the start of that bend to the center line that we already established. And it looks like that is 18 inches. So it's important to note that I write down all my measurements exactly how they are tight to the chassis, and then we take the 1/4 inch tolerance that we dictated before and we'll make adjustments to these measurements as we mark them on the tube. That way I know that all measurements on all my templates that I scan and save in files are tight to the chassis marking. So if I need to alter any tolerances, I can do that on the go. So we're going to go ahead and write our center line right there. Start of first bend is at 18 inches from the center line. Okay, so now that we figured out where the start of the first bend is going to be, all we really need to do is just transfer it to the other side. All this is going to be mirrored, so we're going to transfer that to the other side. What I did was I just measured 18 inches from the center line, put a piece of tape in, marked it, we're good to go. That way when I put the cage in, I can reference it and make sure that everything lined up exactly where it was supposed to be. Next step is going to be measuring the angle for this first bend. This is where the digital angle finder is going to come in handy. The nice thing about a digital angle finder is no matter how you have this, here, I'll put it up here. No matter how you have the chassis mounted, whether it's on jack stands, what have you, okay, this chassis isn't exactly level on the ground.
So
not surprising.
1.3 or 13?
1.3 degrees to the right a little bit. So all we have to do is just hit the calibrate, and we're zeroed out. Okay, now it's gonna, everything we're gonna get from then on is gonna be zeroed out for, is gonna compensate for the
It being crooked.
unleveledness of this chassis. Okay. We're gonna measure the angle of our first bend. So all we're gonna do is put the angle finder up to the B pillar right here. And it looks like we're getting 59.8 degrees. It's about 60 degrees. We'll give it a 60-degree bend. That way it makes our math a little bit easier. 60-degree bend is going to be our first bend. Because this is going to be a 60-degree bend, we already know this bend needs to be 30 degrees. 30 plus 60 equals 90. We just need to figure out where it's going to sit. So much like what we did for this to mark out the start of this bend, we're going to do the same thing over here. I'm going to go ahead and put a piece of tape down where I think the start of that bend is going to go. And we're going to take our handy dandy cheater bar, push it tight up against the chassis, and see where that 30-degree bend is going to sit. Now there's a nice little line with the chassis right there, so I think that's where I want it to sit. So go ahead and layer in there, layer in tight, slide it back. There we go. And then we'll go ahead and work. So we're going to go ahead and measure from the floor or from the bottom of our y-axis that we measured at the beginning up to the start of this first bend. And it looks like we're getting about 32 5/8 of an inch. So we know this bend starts at 32 5/8 inch.